President Trump is one of our most online presidents ever, and he spent the weekend on Truth Social amplifying all sorts of posts, including on a familiar conspiracy. No, not the Jeffrey Epstein files, and that's the story, of course, that has driven the news for weeks, but much safer political terrain for his base. There was the Russia investigation, former President Barack Obama, and alleging corruption in that White House. Is it a strategy or just the president's weekend musings? Well, we have CNN's Kristen Holmes here to break that down for us. So Kristen, what were you hearing from inside the White House this weekend?
Yeah, Manu, I think it's somewhere in the middle there, somewhere between an actual strategy and the president's musings. We know that President Trump wants to talk about literally anything else other than Jeffrey Epstein. You kind of saw that today and throughout the weekend as he posted on almost every topic imaginable. Cashless bail, Adam Schiff, at one point touting Mark Levin's book. He posted memes of Democrats in jumpsuits, a rant about a Wall Street Journal article not related to Jeffrey Epstein, but instead one that indicated that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had told him not to fire Jerome Powell. That seemed to very much get under his skin, saying he's the one who tells his team what to do, not the other way around. And then, of course, as you mentioned, this entire rant, multiple posts about the Washington Commanders threatening not to make a deal on their new stadium unless they went back to the Washington Redskins. This is a little bit of a different turn of what we have seen from the end of the week. We had seen really several weeks of the White House and President Trump completely on the defensive. President Trump is not good on the defensive. But when this Wall Street Journal story came out at the end of the week that alleged this birthday letter with him coming out against that story, with him filing a lawsuit, the White House felt like they were on the offensive. And of course, as we know, he ordered the Attorney General to unseal that grand jury testimony. But there are still questions about what more he can do. And those questions are coming from his MAGA base and his loyalists. And I can tell you that a few of his allies have even asked me if I can get a question to the president in a briefing or to the press secretary or shout a question at him about why he's not doing more. So this might have tied some of these people over for the short term, but there are a lot of questions still because there's a really overarching belief that there's not going to be that much information in that grand jury testimony. So now people are wondering and they're starting to push for more information. So, long story short, Manu, this story is not going away.
Yeah, as much as the president wants to, it certainly won't. And thank you so much, Kristen Holmes, live for us in the White House. And I'm joined in the room by a terrific group of reporters, Leanne Caldwell of Puck, Jasmine Wright of Notice, and Semaphor's Dave Weigel. Nice to see you all. So Leanne, you foreshadowed this actually in a story a couple of weeks ago. You said most of the nearly dozen Republicans I spoke to about Epstein over the past few days predicted that Trump would do something dramatic to shift national focus from the subject, employing his reliable tactic of changing the narrative to benefit himself. The question, though, is that is this situation different? Because those Republicans, they're the ones who have been demanding it. They've been pushing for more release for years, months, weeks, and they were disappointed by what the Justice Department and Trump ultimately did.
Yeah, there's this string of the Republican Party, the MAGA base really, who is very anti-establishment. And part of the reason they support Donald Trump is because Donald Trump was going to be the person to break all of that and tell the truth and to break the deep state, essentially. And that's why they're not satisfied with what is happening right now. As you well know, we see on Capitol Hill a bipartisan resolution that is being pushed. I haven't checked since a couple hours ago, but 10 Republicans have already signed on to that. And so, all Democrats are expected to sign on to it too. So that is very much a majority of House members. But we're seeing the president kind of an anatomy of his public relations strategy that he's used over and over again, which is to distract, to attack, to deflect, and also to blame other people. And we saw that essentially in his Truth Social post screeds last night. And we'll see if it works this time.
Yeah, there were quite a bit of screeds, if you will, on Truth Social, just a handful of them going after the California Democrat, hit one of his nemesis on the Hill, Adam Schiff, saying that he's in big trouble for some allegation suggesting that he may have committed a crime. Of course, Schiff denies that. then showing mugshots of Obama officials in all from Samantha Power to Barack Obama, including saying Barack Hussein Obama, and then what Kristen mentioned too about pressuring the Washington Commanders to change their name back to the Washington Redskins. Jasmine, you cover the White House. What are you hearing from how the president views where he is on this story at this moment?
Well, President Trump said it publicly on Saturday on Truth Social. He said even if the court gave full and unwavering approval of all of these documents, people would still not be happy. Now, he said Democrats would still not be happy, but the reality is that his base is still not going to be happy, no matter what they put out, particularly because what is in those grand jury testimonies is kind of a limited scope of everything that the White House could release. I think that it's kind of twofold here, though. I think that for once in the last really 3 weeks, the White House feels at least at a decent place, that they're able to manage some of the onslaught of these questions, particularly because of that Wall Street Journal story, making sure that the media is now the biggest foe and accusing Trump of doing something when they don't believe that he has. And so one person told me that everyone is aligned and on the way forward, and they said it with a grin, which has not been on the faces of White House officials for the last 2 weeks. But then I think that they are recognizing that there is an existential question of how far can this go and whether or not they'll really be able to wrap their arms around it as people continue to ask more and more questions. And I think that outstanding question is what potentially has people not concerned, but a little, iffy. On the way
part of his strategy clearly is to try to get his base back on his side, which is why he went after the Wall Street Journal the way that he did. They launched that lawsuit again after that story, $20 billion or so, asking for damages in that case. But he could be deposed. In that case, Trump, if this does go to court, he could get me deposed, and potentially we could learn even more about Trump's relationship with Epstein.
Yes, that is the difference between this and other stories that moved out of the news cycle when Trump wanted him to move out of the news cycle. He has that power, but there is organic interest in the Jeffrey Epstein story that bigger than a lot of people who are covering politics appreciated until the last 3 weeks. And with Democrats, he's dealing with a different alignment of Democrats on this question. He ran in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. Bill Clinton was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein too, at least there are photos of them together. And there is an older generation of Democrats who are not as ready to get into the fray on this and to say, release everything, let the chips fall. I think there are some Republicans who still believe Democrats think that way. The younger generation of Democrats don't have that connection. They are not worried about any of them or their colleagues being on these. They find this to be a really hooky, interesting way to say their party is for the elite and we're not. So dealing with Democrats who are not going to drop this, who are going to worry and pull their collar and pivot to another story, that's not going to happen here.
Yeah, and it's interesting looking at the polls. There have been multiple polls now showing that how the American public views this issue. This is from CBS just yesterday. Should DOJ release all the information on Epstein? 89% say yes. I mean, you'd rarely see that in polls in this era of polarized politics. And you ask about how do Republicans feel about this, of whether they're satisfied with how Trump has done this well, if they've handled it well. Just 50% of Republicans, 49% say they're dissatisfied. I mean, typically Trump is at 90% or so among Republicans, no matter what the issue is here, 50%.
Well, it's interesting because a Republican operative texted me a poll last week that said, look, he's still at 90% among his base. It wasn't asking about this specifically, but this moment in time. And that's what Republicans are hoping is maintained, that his party is still behind him, regardless of this issue. Now, electorally, Trump's not on the ballot in 2026. Republicans I talk to think that there is not going to be a Jeffrey Epstein bump for Democrats in the midterm elections. But there is some concern about Trump's brand being diminished. And if that is, then perhaps around the margins, around the edges, that impacts turnout and motivation for Republican voters in the midterms.
The question is, too, you mentioned that there could be a vote in the House. We'll see how that happens. There's this effort to try to circumvent the Republican leadership, force a vote in the House that's led by Congressman Thomas Massie. There are 11 co-sponsors on his bill, Republican co-sponsors, but they have to sign on to a separate effort to actually force a vote in the House, and about 4 Republicans would be needed to sign on with all Democrats to get there. There's going to be a major pressure campaign from Trump over those members to not sign on to this petition to force a vote. How do you see that playing out?
He has a very good record for pulling people to the White House and saying, stop caring so much about this. There are not many who are that vulnerable to voters if they go home and they don't release these documents. If this is smothered, they know, though, it gives Democrats an issue they're very happy to campaign on. And the current distraction, not to overuse that word in this segment, but of attacking the Wall Street Journal and saying, well, the real, this is, you really get on our side because the media is trying to take down Trump over this. That's going to be very compelling for a lot of members, not for the Tom Masseys of the world, because they're used to that. They're used to being told to get in line, that we have a new enemy now. They don't separate. The narrative for years with Epstein was also Trump is not going to be in these. Don't worry about it. These Republicans signing on don't think they're going to be part of releasing bad information about Donald Trump. They don't know why he's not releasing it.
Yeah, and I have some predictions on who on that list might fold. I won't say that publicly at the moment. We'll see if that ultimately happens.